There is something that has been following you for most of your life. It is not a feeling exactly, and it is not a thought, but it lives somewhere between the two, a quiet and persistent awareness that the world, as most people accept it, does not quite add up. You have sat in rooms full of people who were nodding along to things that seemed obviously wrong to you, and you have wondered whether you were the one who was broken. You have watched conversations unfold around you, where everyone seemed satisfied with answers that only deepened your questions, and you have learned, slowly and painfully, to keep most of what you actually think to yourself. Not because you are afraid, exactly, but because you have been through enough of those conversations to know how they end, with you feeling more alone than before they started. This is not a video about being smarter than other people. That framing is too small and honestly too dangerous, because the thing I want to describe has nothing to do with intelligence as a performance or an identity. It has to do with something else entirely, something that is harder to name and more important to understand. It has to do with a particular relationship to reality, a particular way of encountering the world, that some people simply have, and that most of the conventional wisdom around success, happiness, and belonging was not designed to accommodate. Hannah Arendt, who spent her life examining the structures that organize human thought and human behavior, understood something crucial about this kind of mind. She understood that the capacity to think, genuinely think, rather than simply process and repeat, is rarer than we like to imagine, and that it comes with costs that the people who possess it rarely see coming. So if you have spent years feeling like a guest in a world that runs on rules you did not help write and do not entirely believe in, I want to offer you something. Not a diagnosis and not a flattery, but a framework. A way of understanding what is actually happening in you and why it keeps happening and what it might mean. If this is opening something up for you, something you have felt but struggled to put into words, consider subscribing. I explore these questions every week, and I would be glad to have you here. The first sign is that you find it almost impossible to accept a belief simply because everyone around you holds it. This sounds simple until you realize how unusual it actually is. Most human cognition, and this is not a criticism but an observation, operates through a kind of social calibration. We inherit frameworks. We absorb the assumptions of our families, our communities, our cultures, and then we experience the world through those assumptions without ever quite examining them. This is not laziness, it is in many ways a form of practical intelligence. The world is vast and complex, and borrowing the interpretive tools of your community is an efficient way to navigate it. But there are some people for whom this process simply does not take hold in the usual way. They inherit the frameworks, yes, but they cannot stop looking at them. They cannot accept an explanation without turning it over and examining its underside. They cannot hear a widely shared belief without wondering almost involuntarily what that belief is doing, who it is serving, and what it requires you not to notice in order to hold it. Arendt called this the capacity for independent thought, and she was careful to distinguish it from contrarianism. The person who simply disagrees with everything as a form of identity is not thinking independently. They have just replaced one conformity with another, the conformity of the rebel. Genuine independent thought is something more uncomfortable and more demanding than that. It is the willingness to arrive at conclusions that have no social support, that may cost you relationships and belonging and the comfort of feeling like part of a group, because the evidence and the reasoning and the weight of honest examination point in a direction that consensus cannot follow. This is exhausting. It is supposed to be exhausting. Thinking, real thinking, is effortful in a way that most of the pleasures available to us are specifically designed to help us avoid. The second sign is that you experience a kind of moral discomfort around behavior that most people around you seem to accept without a second thought. Not a morally superior discomfort, not the discomfort of someone who believes they are better, but a genuine, almost physical unease when you witness a gap between how people say they value things and how they actually treat them. You notice when the powerful person in the room takes credit for someone else's work, and the noticing does not let you go easily. You notice when a policy that sounds reasonable on the surface produces outcomes that are quietly devastating for the people with the least power to resist it, and you find that you cannot unsee it once you have seen it. You notice, perhaps most uncomfortably of all, The moments when you yourself behave in ways that are inconsistent with what you genuinely believe, and those moments stay with you longer than they seem to stay with other people. Arendt wrote about what she called the thinking ego, the part of us that is always, in some sense, watching ourselves, holding ourselves in a kind of internal dialogue, accountable to a standard that is not entirely social. She distinguished this from conscience in the religious sense, because she was not interested in inherited moral codes. What she was describing was something more fundamental, the experience of being unable to fully escape your own judgment. Most people, she suggested, can quiet that internal voice with enough distraction, enough agreement from the people around them, enough reassurance that everyone else is doing the same thing. For some people, the voice does not quiet. For some people, the gap between what they see and what the world says they should see is simply too loud to ignore. The third sign is a deep and sometimes debilitating sensitivity to inauthenticity, not just in others, but in yourself. You have walked away from conversations where you performed a version of yourself that felt hollow, and you carried a specific kind of exhaustion afterward that had nothing to do with how much energy the conversation required. You have been in rooms where the social performance was running smoothly, where everyone was playing their part correctly, and you felt a strange loneliness inside it, a sense that something real was being kept carefully out of the room. You have noticed that the closer you get to some people, the more clearly you can see the distance between who they present themselves as and who they actually are, and that this noticing, rather than making you feel superior, tends to make you sad. Arendt was fascinated by the relationship between appearance and reality in human life, by the question of what it means to show up, genuinely, in the shared world of other people. She understood the vita activa, the life of action and engagement, as requiring a kind of courage that most of us underestimate, the courage to actually appear, to be seen, to offer your genuine perspective into the space of other people, rather than offering the version of yourself that has already been approved for their comfort. The person who is sensitive to inauthenticity is often struggling with exactly this tension. They can see what genuine appearance would require. They can see what they would have to risk to actually show up as themselves. And they can see with painful clarity all the ways that most social life is organized around the shared project of not doing that. The fourth sign is that you think in connections rather than in categories. When most people encounter a new piece of information, they file it. They find the category it belongs to. They note whether it confirms or challenges what they already believe, and they move on. Your mind does not do this, or at least it does not do only this. Your mind keeps asking what else this connects to, what it implies about other things you know, how it changes the shape of a question you thought was settled. You find yourself in conversations about one topic, and suddenly you are somewhere else entirely, following a thread that felt urgent, and that other people look at you slightly blankly for having pursued. You struggle to explain your thinking process because it does not move in the straight lines that explanations seem to require. It moves associatively, in leaps, in spirals, and the connections you arrive at feel obvious to you and opaque to almost everyone else. This is not a quirk of personality. It is a reflection of something real about the structure of knowledge. Arendt understood that the most important questions, the ones that actually matter for understanding the human condition, are not the ones that sit neatly within a discipline or a category. They are the questions that live at the intersections, in the gaps between what one framework can see and what another one is designed to illuminate. The mind that moves between frameworks, that is uncomfortable being confined to one vocabulary or one set of approved tools, is doing something philosophically serious, even when it looks, from the outside, like an inability to stay on topic. I know that many of you watching this have never felt fully understood in this, not by the people closest to you, and maybe not even by yourself. You have spent years wondering whether the way your mind works is a gift or a problem, whether the connections you see are genuine, or whether you are simply making things more complicated than they need to be. You have been told, probably more than once, that you overthink. And you have smiled and nodded, and privately wondered whether the people saying that have ever actually thought about what it would mean to think enough. I want you to share something in the comments below. Tell me, When did you first realize that your mind worked differently from most of the people around you? Was there a moment, a conversation, a classroom, a relationship where it became clear that the way you were encountering things was not quite the way everyone else was? If words feel hard right now, just type, "I stopped pretending a long time ago," because someone else watching this needs to see those words. They need to know that the recognition they have been carrying alone is actually shared. The fifth sign is that conformity, when it is required of you, produces something that feels less like discomfort and more like a kind of internal suffocation. You have taken jobs or entered social worlds that required you to perform beliefs you did not hold, to express enthusiasm for things that struck you as empty, to suppress the observations that would have made the room uncomfortable, and you have felt yourself disappearing inside those requirements in a way that was not just unpleasant, but genuinely threatening to something essential in you. Other people seem to navigate these compromises with more ease, or at least with less visible cost. They compartmentalize. They separate the self that shows up at work or at the family gathering from some other, truer self that they tend in private. You have tried to do this and found that the compartments do not hold. The distance between what you are required to perform and what you actually are keeps collapsing in on itself, and the collapse has real consequences. Arendt understood this as a philosophical problem as much as a personal one. She argued that the examined life, the life in which you actually live in accordance with your thinking, is not merely a preference, but a kind of existential requirement for people who are capable of genuine thought. The unexamined life is not simply less satisfying for such people. It is, in a specific sense, not really their life. They are living someone else's script, running on someone else's assumptions, and the part of them that knows the difference cannot be entirely silenced. This is why conformity, for the person with a genuinely independent mind, is not just a social sacrifice. It is an erasure of the self, and some part of them is always aware of what is being erased. The sixth sign is that you have a complicated relationship with belonging. You want it genuinely and deeply, perhaps more deeply than you want almost anything else. You want to be known, to be part of something, to exist in the company of people who understand you without requiring constant translation. But you have found again and again that the price of belonging is usually a degree of suppression of the self that you cannot sustain. You can pay it for a while. Or you can perform the group identity, accept the group's assumptions, laugh at the right things and express concern about the right things, and stay carefully within the range of perspectives the group has approved. And then something happens. You see something they are not seeing, or you cannot stop thinking about something they have collectively agreed not to think about, and suddenly you are outside again. Not banished usually, just outside. Watching the warm circle of their shared understanding from a position you did not choose and cannot entirely fix. What Arendt offers here is not comfort exactly, but something more useful than comfort: clarity. She understood that the space of appearance, the shared world in which people genuinely meet each other, is not built from agreement. It is built from plurality, from the presence of genuinely different perspectives that are willing to remain in genuine contact with each other, neither collapsing into sameness nor retreating into isolation. The kind of belonging you are actually looking for is not the belonging of similarity. It is the belonging of being genuinely encountered by people who are willing to hold a different perspective than yours without needing either of you to give it up. This kind of belonging is rare. It is rare because it requires exactly the kind of tolerance for genuine difference that most social structures are designed to minimize. But it exists, and knowing what you are actually looking for is the beginning of being able to find it. The seventh sign is that you experience time and meaning differently from most people around you. The future that most social narratives offer, the career trajectory, the accumulating markers of status and success, the life that gets progressively more comfortable and respectable, has never quite worked as a motivating story for you. Not because you are incapable of ambition, but because you find it almost impossible to want things that you do not believe in, and you have struggled, honestly, to believe that the things most people are running toward are actually worth the running. You live more in the present than the future, often involuntarily, because the questions that grip you are questions about what is happening right now, in this room, in this conversation, in this specific moment of human life, rather than questions about what credentials you will accumulate or what position you will occupy. And this, more than almost anything else, makes you hard to fit into the standard templates for a life. There is something else worth naming here, which is that this different relationship to time is not accidental. It is connected to a particular sensitivity to the present moment as the only place where anything real actually happens. You have noticed that most of the machinery of modern life, the career building, the status accumulating, the relationship managing, the continuous performance of a self-oriented toward the future, is designed to keep you out of the present, to keep you moving through time rather than in it. And you have found again and again that you cannot stay in that machinery for long before something in you starts to resist, to pull you back toward the actual texture of what is happening right now. The conversations that feel real to you are conversations in the present, about what is actually being experienced and thought and felt in this moment, not performances of projected futures or defenses of accumulated pasts. And this makes you, by the standards of a world organized around the future, an unreliable participant. Arendt wrote about natality, about the capacity for genuine beginning that is built into the human condition, the fact that each person who enters the world is not simply a continuation of what already existed, but a genuine novelty, a source of the unpredictable. She believed that the greatest threat to human freedom was not suffering or conflict, but the quiet erasure of this novelty, the reduction of unique human minds to interchangeable units in processes that had been designed before they arrived and would continue after they were gone. The person who refuses to conform is not simply being difficult. They are, in the deepest sense Arendt meant, being human. They are insisting on their own irreducible particularity in a world that has many uses for people who will surrender it. If what has been explored here is touching something real in you, something you have been living with for a long time without having the language for it, I want you to know that you are not alone in this. There are more people than you think who are navigating exactly this territory, who are trying to figure out how to live honestly in a world that rewards a certain kind of managed dishonesty, who are holding on to the examined life even when it makes everything harder. I create these explorations for people who are ready to go deeper than the usual frameworks allow, who are not willing to trade their genuine perception for the comfort of belonging to something that does not actually see them. If that is you, consider subscribing. Not because this channel will make things easier, but because thinking these things through together is better than thinking them alone. I would be honored to have you here, as part of a community that takes these questions seriously and takes the people who carry them seriously. Come back every week. There is always more to examine, and if this particular exploration landed for you, leave a comment below. Tell me which of these signs resonated most. Tell me what it has cost you to have a mind that will not simply settle. I read every word, and I promise you, what you share here matters more than you know. There is a line of Arendt's that I return to again and again, and I want to leave you with the thought at its center, even if not her exact words. She wrote about the solitude of thinking as something that was not the same as loneliness, because in genuine thought, you are never entirely alone. You are always in a kind of dialogue with yourself, with the part of you that asks questions and the part that answers them. And this internal conversation is, she believed, the foundation of everything genuinely human. The mind that refuses to conform is not a mind that has failed to connect with others. It is a mind that has, perhaps without ever choosing to, maintained the inner dialogue that makes genuine connection possible. It has kept the conversation alive inside itself, even when the world outside offered it no audience. And that, in the end, is not a problem to be solved. It is the very thing that makes you capable of the thinking that matters most. The quiet, the questioning, the refusal to simply accept the world as it has been handed to you. These are not symptoms of something wrong. They are signs of something rare, something that the world needs more of, even when it does not know how to receive it. Hold on to it. Do not let the exhaustion of being different convince you that different means broken. Different in this case means awake, and being awake, even when it costs you, is always worth more than the alternative.